The Lion and the Abandoned Boy, a tale of the wild. The African sun had barely begun its ascent, casting a golden hue over the vast expanse of the Serengeti Wildlife Reserve. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant watering holes. Rafiki, a massive male lion, had just woken from his slumber, his amber eyes blinking lazily against the first rays of daylight. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Stretching his powerful frame, he let out a deep growl, a signal to the world that he was awake. He was a king in his own right, a lone lion who had fought hard for his survival. Unlike other males that roamed in prides, Rafiki had chosen solitude, carving out his own territory within the reserve. But today, something was different. The wind carried a sound he had never heard before. A cry. A child's cry. A cry in the wild. Rafiki's ears twitched as he followed the sound, his massive paws barely making a noise on the dry earth. He moved with the grace of a predator, but there was no hunt in his eyes, only curiosity. When he reached a clearing, he saw the source of the distress. A small boy, no older than 4, sat in the middle of the dirt road, sobbing uncontrollably. His tiny frame was shaking, his blue jacket covered in dust, and his face stained with tears. He'd been left alone, abandoned, in one of the most dangerous places on earth. Rafiki stopped a few feet away, his golden eyes locked onto the boy's tear-filled gaze. The moment stretched endlessly. Then, Rafiki let out a deafening roar. The child froze. His tiny body shuddered as he slowly turned his gaze toward the beast standing before him. The lion's mane bristled as he bared his teeth in an intimidating display. But something was off. Rafiki wasn't looking at the boy. He was looking beyond him. A hidden danger. Before the boy could understand what was happening, Rafiki lunged forward. The child squeezed his eyes shut, expecting the worst. But instead of attacking him, the lion leaped over his head. A split second later, a guttural snarl split the silence. When the boy opened his eyes, Rafiki was no longer focused on him, but on another lion. This lion was thinner, younger, and clearly desperate. Its ribs jutted out beneath its dusty coat, and its yellow eyes were filled with hunger. It had been stalking the child, seeing him as nothing more than prey. But Rafiki would not allow it. With a powerful swipe of his paw, he struck the intruder across the face, sending the younger lion sprawling onto the ground. A sharp yelp of pain echoed through the clearing as the challenger scrambled to its feet, locking eyes with Rafiki. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then, with one last calculating glance at the powerful male before him, the intruder backed away, disappearing into the tall grass. Rafiki watched him go before turning back to the child, his breathing deep, his mane wild from the fight. The ranger's arrival. A cloud of dust rose in the distance. A green Jeep came barreling down the road. Inside, Ethan Walker, one of the senior wildlife rangers at the reserve, gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He had received a radio call minutes ago. A child had been spotted near the southern boundary of the reserve. That was impossible. No one should have been able to get inside without being noticed. But as he sped down the road, the truth became undeniable. There he was, a small, helpless boy sitting in the dirt, and beside him, the largest lion Ethan had ever seen. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. His first instinct was to slam on the brakes and grab his rifle. But what he saw next shocked him to his core. A lion's protection. Instead of attacking the boy, Rafiki lay down beside him. He let out a low, rumbling growl, not of aggression, but of warning, scanning the horizon for any other threats. He was protecting him. Ethan's hands trembled as he reached for his radio. "Control, this is Walker," he said breathlessly. "I've got eyes on the kid, and you're not going to believe this. He's sitting next to a full-grown male lion." Silence crackled through the radio. "What's your status?" the dispatcher finally asked. Ethan swallowed hard. "The lion isn't hurting him. In fact, I think he saved him." There was another long pause before the dispatcher's voice came through, barely above a whisper. "You need to get that boy out of there, carefully." Ethan cut the engine. Any sudden movement could break the fragile balance that had formed between the boy and the lion. He slowly opened the door and took a cautious step forward. "Hey, buddy," Ethan called softly, kneeling to the child's level. "I'm here to take you somewhere safe." The boy sniffled, his tiny hands clutching the fabric of his jacket. His eyes flicked between Ethan and Rafiki, as if asking the lion for permission. Rafiki watched the ranger closely. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he let out a slow exhale and stood. The boy hesitated before crawling toward Ethan, his small hands reaching out for safety. Ethan scooped him up, his heart pounding in relief. As he backed away, Rafiki remained still, his golden eyes glowing under the morning light. Ethan took one last look at the lion before carrying the child back to the jeep. As he strapped the boy in, he whispered, "You just met an angel, kid." The boy, still wiping his tears, looked back toward the clearing. Rafiki was gone. A mystery unfolds. Later that evening, as the reserve staff tried to piece together how the child had ended up in such a dangerous place, Ethan received a call that sent chills down his spine. The local authorities had identified the boy. He had been reported missing 3 days ago. Someone had deliberately left him there. But they hadn't counted on one thing: a lion with the heart of a guardian. And as Ethan looked out over the vast expanse of the Serengeti that night, he couldn't shake the thought. Sometimes, the most unlikely protectors are the ones that save us when we least expect it. The Serengeti sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden hue across the reserve as Ethan Walker drove carefully down the rugged dirt road, his arms wrapped protectively around the little boy named David. The child's cries had lessened, but his small body still trembled in confusion and fear. Seated beside them in the passenger seat, Scout, the massive lion, exuded a quiet confidence, his amber eyes scanning the wilderness for any lingering threats. Ethan still couldn't believe what had happened. The boy had been left behind, vulnerable to the harsh wild. And yet, in the face of unimaginable danger, Scout, the very king of this land, had protected him. Why? A surprising connection. Scout had always been a dominant force in the reserve, a lion who feared nothing and ruled his territory with an iron will. But to Ethan, Scout was something more: a survivor. He had found Scout as a helpless cub, trembling beside his mother's lifeless body after poachers had ruthlessly taken her life. Ethan had made a promise that day to protect him, to give him a fighting chance. And today, Scout had repaid that kindness in an extraordinary way. Did he see something of himself in the abandoned boy? Was there an instinct beyond survival, an unspoken understanding between two souls who had both known loss? Ethan sighed, his mind racing with questions. But first, he needed answers. The heartbreaking discovery. Back at the ranger station, Ethan wrapped David in a warm blanket, handing him a cup of tea laced with honey, a small comfort after the terrifying ordeal. The boy's wide, frightened eyes flickered toward the large screen in front of them as Ethan pulled up the reserve CCTV footage from the outer boundary. What he saw made his chest tighten. A battered old sedan, barely holding itself together, appeared on the screen. The footage was grainy, but Ethan could make out two figures inside a young man and a woman. The man remained in the car, but the woman, David's mother, stepped out, cradling the child in her arms. She hesitated. She looked around nervously, clearly searching for something. Then, she found a small weakness in the fence where the metal had come loose. Ethan's breath caught as he watched her push her way through, stepping onto the reserve. She kneeled, pressing a kiss to the child's forehead, her arms lingering around him for just a moment too long. Then, she stood. She turned back without looking, and she was gone. David's tiny figure toddled after her, but the car had already pulled away, vanishing into the horizon, leaving nothing behind but the dust in its wake. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. She had loved him. That much was clear. But why had she left him here inside the reserve, where he could have been killed? A desperate choice. Ethan rewound the footage, watching her face again. The way she looked around, was she hoping someone would see him? That he would be found quickly? It didn't make sense. If she wanted him safe, why not take him to an orphanage, a hospital, even a village? He clenched his jaw. There was only one answer: desperation. She had no other option. Ethan had spent years working with local communities near the reserve, and he knew that some of the villagers struggled to afford even the most basic needs. He had seen it before, families making impossible choices. But abandoning a child in the wild? His stomach twisted. No, there was something more to this. The lion's mark. David, now nestled into Ethan's chair, was watching videos of Scout on Ethan's phone. Every few minutes, the boy pointed at the screen excitedly, his voice lifting with pure delight. "Lion!" he chirped, making a tiny roaring sound. Ethan chuckled, despite the heaviness in his heart. "That's right, kid. That lion saved you." David clapped his hands. "My lion!" Ethan paused, watching the boy carefully. Could he sense it, too? Could he feel, even at his young age, that something bigger had happened? That Scout had been more than just an animal in that moment? But before Ethan could speak, a knock at the door interrupted them. It was the authorities. A difficult goodbye. The officer stood at the threshold, kind but firm, ready to take the child. Ethan knew it was coming, but his heart clenched anyway. David had only been with him for a few hours, yet something about the boy, his innocence, his resilience had carved its way into Ethan's soul. He hesitated before handing him over. The boy clung to Ethan's jacket, his tiny fists gripping the fabric. "Lion!" David whimpered, reaching out as if expecting to see Scout again. Ethan swallowed past the tightness in his throat. "Scout's out there, buddy. He'll always be watching." David sniffled, then, almost as if he understood, he nodded. Ethan watched as the officers carried him away, his small blue jacket disappearing into the car, just like the one in the CCTV footage. Then, he was gone. A ranger's reflection. That night, Ethan sat on the porch of the ranger station, staring out into the vast savanna. He thought about David, about Scout, about the mother who had left her child behind in an impossible situation. Had she driven away in tears, regretting every second? Had she watched the rearview mirror, praying for some miracle to save him? Ethan sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. Life was cruel sometimes. It forced people to make choices they never should have to make. But Scout had chosen differently. In that moment, he had protected David as if he were his own. Was it instinct? Fate? A memory of the past? Ethan didn't know. But one thing was certain sometimes. The greatest protectors come in the most unexpected forms. And sometimes against all odds. A lion can have the heart of a guardian. Epilogue. A familiar shadow. 2 weeks passed. Ethan had nearly convinced himself he would never see David again. Then, one morning, as he patrolled the southern boundary, he spotted a figure standing in the distance. A woman. She was holding a child. David. His heart pounded. As he approached, the woman burst into tears, clutching David to her chest. "I didn't want to leave him," she whispered. "I thought if someone found him, maybe he'd have a better life than I could give him." Ethan exhaled sharply, his emotions overwhelming him. "Come with me," he said. "Let's figure this out, together." And in the distance, a golden figure watched from the tall grass, its amber eyes calm, knowing. Scout had seen it all. He had protected the boy once, and now he would protect him again. The setting sun cast long golden rays over the Serengeti as Ethan Walker sat on the porch of the ranger station, watching little David play in the yard. Just days ago, this boy had been left alone in the wilderness, abandoned, frightened, and vulnerable. But now, he giggled as he stacked rocks, his tiny fingers carefully placing them atop one another, as if building something solid, something permanent. Ethan's heart ached. The authorities had failed to find David's family. There were no relatives, no parents searching for him, no desperate calls pleading for their child's return. Which meant there was only one option. An orphanage. The word alone sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. A sterile, unfamiliar place. A life of uncertainty. Could he really let that happen? A decision that changed everything. David had already settled into Ethan's world like he had belonged there all along. He followed the rangers around, fascinated by their work. He clung to Ethan's side during his daily patrols, watching in awe as the man he now trusted completely interacted with the animals of the reserve. Just yesterday, Ethan had taken David on a ride to see the lions, and the boy had squealed with pure delight at the sight of cub lions tumbling in the tall grass, playing without a care in the world. It was magical, seeing the land he loved through the eyes of a child. A child who had no one else. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. He had spent the last few nights struggling with the question that refused to leave his mind. Could he do this? Could he be a father? He had no experience raising a child. He wasn't a teacher or a caregiver. He was a ranger, a protector of the wild. But then again, hadn't he done just that for Scout all those years ago? He had rescued Scout as a cub when poachers had killed his mother. He had raised him, protected him, and given him a home in the only way he knew how. And then, in an unimaginable turn of fate, Scout had done the same. He had saved David. The thought settled something in Ethan's heart, bringing a clarity he hadn't felt before. David had already lost enough. There would be no orphanage, no uncertain future. Ethan would be his father. The road to becoming a family. The next few months were difficult. The legal process was long, grueling, and filled with obstacles, but Ethan never wavered. He filled out endless paperwork, sat through interviews, and proved time and again that he wasn't just doing this out of impulse, but because he truly wanted David to have a home. The hardest part was waiting. Every day, Ethan feared that someone would arrive with news that a distant family member had been found, that David would be taken away before Ethan even had a chance to show him what a real home felt like. But that news never came. And finally, after months of fighting for him, Ethan became David's legal guardian, a father, a son, and a lion. The morning after the adoption was finalized, Ethan woke up to find David already dressed, his little boots strapped on, his jacket slightly crooked. The boy beamed at him, eyes bright. "See lions?" Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "All right, kid. Let's go see the lions." They loaded up the old green Jeep, bumping along the dirt road as they made their way deeper into the reserve. The sun hung low in the sky, bathing the land in soft golden light, stretching endless and free. David sat up on the seat beside Ethan, his small hands gripping the dashboard, his eyes scanning the horizon. And then there he was. Scout. The massive lion lay stretched beneath the shade of an acacia tree, his golden mane ruffling slightly in the morning breeze. The other lions kept their distance, respecting his dominance. He was the king of this land. As the Jeep slowed, Scout lifted his head lazily, his piercing amber eyes locking onto Ethan's. Then his gaze shifted to David. David pressed his tiny face to the window, his breath fogging up the glass, his small hands waving excitedly. Scout blinked slowly. Then, in a movement so casual yet deeply profound, he raised his massive head in acknowledgement, a silent greeting between the lion and the boy. Ethan felt his throat tighten. It was as if Scout knew. He knew that the little boy he had once protected now had a home. Knew that the ranger who had once saved him had saved another lost soul. Ethan reached over, tousling David's hair as the boy continued to stare in awe. "You know," Ethan murmured, "I'm going to tell you a story when you're older, about a lion named Scout and how he once saved a little boy." David turned, his big brown eyes wide with curiosity. "Me?" Ethan smiled. "Yeah, buddy, you. A new beginning." As the Jeep rumbled on, leaving the pride behind, Scout remained where he was, watching until they disappeared over the horizon. There were no words between them, no grand gestures. Just an understanding. A silent promise. Ethan had once believed he was only a ranger, a protector of animals and the land. But now, he realized he was something more. A father. A guardian. And as the savannah stretched endlessly before them, bathed in the golden light of morning, he knew one thing for certain. Love always finds a way. And sometimes, against all odds. A lion's heart beats with the spirit of a guardian. Epilogue, a full circle. Years passed. David grew stronger, braver, his love for the wild growing just as fiercely as Ethan had hoped. And Scout? Scout remained a legend in the reserve, a protector, a silent watcher in the distance. One day, as Ethan and David drove out to check on the lions, they spotted a familiar golden figure resting atop a hill, his mane now streaked with hints of silver. David, now a teenager, leaned forward, watching in awe. "He still remembers," David murmured. Ethan nodded, pride swelling in his chest. "Yeah, he does." Scout turned his head ever so slightly, as if acknowledging them one last time, before disappearing into the tall grass, blending into the golden land that had always been his kingdom. And as Ethan watched him go, he whispered a silent thank you. For a lion who had once saved a boy. For a boy who had saved a man. For the miracle that had brought them all together. The power of unexpected bonds, a life lesson from a lion's heart. Life often leads us down roads we never planned to travel. We expect our journey to be straightforward, yet sometimes we are met with unexpected twists, moments that test us, shape us, and redefine who we are. The story of Ethan, David, and Scout is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unforeseen places. It teaches us about compassion, second chances, and the courage to step into roles we never imagined for ourselves. Ethan never set out to become a father. His life was built around the wild, the land, and the animals he swore to protect. But when fate placed a helpless child in his path, he had to make a choice: look away or step forward. It's a dilemma many of us face in life, not necessarily with abandoned children, but with opportunities to help, protect, and make a difference. Too often, people assume that their role in the world is fixed, that they aren't meant to do certain things because of their background or lack of experience. Yet, Ethan's story proves otherwise. He wasn't a father by birth, but he became one by choice. How often do we tell ourselves that something isn't our responsibility, that someone else will step up, that we aren't qualified to help? The truth is, compassion requires no qualifications. Just as Ethan saved David, we too have the power to impact lives in ways we never expected, whether through kindness to a stranger, mentorship to a young person, or simply standing up for someone in need. Scout, the lion, embodies another vital lesson: the power of protection and loyalty. Despite being a wild animal, he recognized the vulnerability of a child and acted in a way that defied expectations. In a world where people often prioritize their own survival, it is easy to forget that true strength lies in looking out for others. In our own lives, how often do we see someone struggling and remain silent? How often do we hesitate to intervene, afraid of getting involved? The truth is, like Scout, we all have the ability to protect, to defend, and to stand up for what is right, whether it's speaking up against injustice or simply being there for someone who feels alone. David's journey reminds us of resilience. Abandoned and left in danger, he could have grown up believing he was unwanted. But because of one person's decision to care, his life changed forever. Many people experience rejection or loss at some point: a failed relationship, a lost opportunity, a feeling of not belonging. But like David, we are not defined by what happens to us. We are shaped by the people who lift us up, by those who refuse to leave us behind. Ultimately, this story is about how love finds a way. Family is not just about blood, it is about who shows up, who stays, and who chooses to fight for us. Whether it's a ranger and a boy, a lion and his rescuer, or any two souls finding each other against the odds, it is proof that the strongest bonds often come from the most unexpected places. And maybe, just maybe, our own greatest purpose lies in choosing to love even when it isn't easy, even when we never expected to. Did you enjoy this story? Would you have made the same choice as Ethan? Have you ever seen a lion in the wild? Share your thoughts below. And if you believe in the power of love, courage, and second chances, subscribe for more incredible stories. Because sometimes the most unexpected bonds create the strongest families. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories that capture the deep and powerful connection between humans and animals. Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Together, Let's celebrate the extraordinary bonds that remind us of the love, loyalty, and resilience that make these stories unforgettable. Join us tomorrow for another heartwarming journey you won't want to miss.